Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. Each week we talk to people active in business and the economy about the big issues driving growth in the north of England. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, one of the UK's largest motor retailers. Check out its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb, owner of Recognition PR. We help scores of businesses to promote their services and products, and some are featured on this podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. There's also the audio version on Spotify, Amazon and Apple Podcast. Today we've got Charles Hope, retail expert and retail principal at BJSS, and Brian Aitken, and Brian Aitken is the editor of The QT. And later my colleague Josh will be speaking to Robert Forrester, who's the CEO of our sponsor, Virtue Motors, about a brand of his which has reached 100 years old. But welcome, gents, first of all, Charles and Brian. I'm going to come to you soon, Charles, because Brian's experience is all in your area of expertise, which is digitisation, particularly in retail. But Brian, I know you. We've known each other years. You're that guy who edited the Journal newspaper. You got newsprint in your blood. You were an old guy who ran the press like the traditions would dictate. Now it's all fresh and new. Tell us about your product, the QT.
Yeah, well, I mean, the QT, we're putting the finishing touches to edition 8 now. It's a weekly product. I would still call it a weekly news magazine. But we decided that the best way to get that news magazine out to readers was through digital means. But I think the days of print are sadly numbered, and you're right. I did. If you had cut me a few years ago, I would have had newsprint coursing through my veins, news ink coursing through my veins. The sad fact is that the public have demonstrated that they no longer want to purchase print products. That they want things quick, conveniently, and that could mean on their telephone, their mobile phone, or it could be their laptop or any other electronic device, and you've actually got to go where the consumer is.
Now, so you've chosen your weapon of choice to get the news out there, but how have you done it? It's a weekly news platform. How does it reach people, and how do you curate its content?
So how we reach people is through social media and digital marketing. Also, I've used my fairly extensive business network to make connections or to reconnect with the business community, to pitch the QT to them, to let them know about it. So that before we launched, we had 7 prestigious founding partners on board, who between them provided us with quite a large subscription base. And, we then used that digital marketing to grow the subscriber base through the means of people signing up to receive free information about the QT. So we've got a database of people who've indicated that they're interested in what they're doing, but they haven't actually become paid subscribers yet. But we send them a newsletter every week with information about what that week's QT contains, in the hope that we can upgrade some of those free subscribers to become paid subscribers.
Well, I'm very pleased to tell you I'm a paid subscriber, and I'm very pleased that the quite content I get, because it is written content. It's not written by people who don't have information. They are trained journalists. If they're not journalists, they're certainly experts in their field. And I think the content is very good, and I would certainly recommend the QT. But it clearly is going to be expensive, and the people who write to you, I'm sure, are not all full-time members of staff, because you've got guest writers. So how have you managed to get the costs all sorted out and get enough money for the launch?
Yeah, well, so I mean, we had a fundraising target through angel investment that we actually hadn't reached, but the point came towards the end of last year when we realised that there was a product out in Manchester called the Manchester Mill that had been going as a Substack-based newsletter for 2 years plus, and it had very slowly built its way up to having a 2,000 person subscriber base. But then, having been going for 2 years and proven themselves to be producers of quality content, all of a sudden they announced that they had received £350,000 of funding from quite a high-profile group of private individuals, including Sir Mark Thompson, the former Director General of the BBC, who now is in charge of CNN. And by that time, we had 7 angel investors on board for the QT, and we went to them and said, actually, maybe we need to scale back on our ambitions for launch and take a leaf out of the Manchester Mills book and get a minimum viable product out there with what we already have, proving the concept that there's an appetite in the Northeast for quality journalism like that of the kind that we're producing, and that's what's happened. So we launched in February, and as I say, we're now on to edition 8, which will be out tomorrow.
Excellent. Now, what is your feeling about the future? You've done this because it's a personal passion of yours, I know, and I know you well enough to know that you don't necessarily harbour ambitions to be the next Jeff Bezos. So, have you done it to sell it and float it, or have you done it for communitarian reasons?
I've certainly not done it through the whole idea of let's build this up and grow it and sell it. I haven't actually given too much thought to the future. This was about something that I felt was needed, and there's several people who are contributors to the QT who I know and respect, like Peter Barron who was the editor of the Northern Echo for many years. And I think when we've been having conversations between ourselves, we've been feeling that there was something needed to be done to raise the quality bar as far as regional journalism was concerned. And that's not meant to be critical of anyone or anything. I just think that the business models that's been pursued by the traditional regional media companies, they're not conducive to having the quality of coverage that maybe was there 10, 15 years ago. And so in many respects that this is a new digital product. We're actually quite traditional in some of our thinking in terms of journalism.
And when you talk about journalism, it isn't automatic. I won't necessarily read about a car accident on the A1, will I? It isn't necessarily breaking news in that context. There's maybe more comment than hard news. Would that be fair?
Yeah, issues. I think what we call news is probably issue-led journalism. So we'll maybe take a look at what's happening with local government finance, for instance, how social care and looking after children's services are being such a drain on local government finances, and yet at the same time, there's an awful lot of people who will blame the council for anything that goes wrong, when actually the councils are caught between a rock and a hard place in many respects, because they rely on a lot of the funding from central government. In real terms, that's been reducing over the years quite drastically. And yet all the while, these costs that they are legally bound to absorb for adult and children's social care are growing. So we kind of raise those issues and try to restore a bit of balance to the commentary that takes place in the region.
Now, you called yourself politically neutral but northeast bias, which is a nice phrase. Being in the northeast, that rings is attractive. But what about you talk about written material? Is it all going to be written material, or is there a role for a radio interview or a sound interview or a video interview or a live stream like we have here? We're live on LinkedIn at the moment. What other methodologies are you going to use to bring the content to viewers or readers?
Well, we have already done some video. We've already done one podcast. I did mention earlier on that we decided to launch with the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
The kind of things that you've said is, as we grow our subscriber base and we continue to invest in our journalism and invest in the QT, these are all things that we will add to the mix and hopefully sooner rather than later.
Well, it is a very interesting product. If you are to subscribe, I'll give you a quick plug for the price, because people should have a look.
Yeah, so they go to the qt.online and have a look around. You can see the homepage and have a good scout around the homepage. And then if you see stuff there that you think, actually, I'd quite like to subscribe to this, you just go to the top of the page, hit subscribe, and you've got some options there where you can sign up for the newsletter for free, but I would rather that you paid £7.99 a month to get the QT. I mean, that's less than £2 a week. And you compare the cost of that to the cost of a newspaper these days, it's actually quite good value considering the volume and the quality of content that you get. You can also do an annual subscription for £79.99, so you get 2 months free.
Excellent. Well, Brian, the very best luck to you, and it nicely segues into my next guest, who's all about digitisation. So thank you, Brian. Charles Hope from BJSS. Tell us first of all what BJSS is.
Hi there. So we are a technology consultancy firm. Fundamentally, we were founded in Leeds. We have offices all across the UK, all across the north, including Newcastle, Manchester, to name a few. Really, what we do is we help various organizations across many industries to design, build, and run modern-day technology platforms that power many of the businesses that we know and love.
Well, you just heard Brian there talking about a platform in a new media. What do you have to say about how he's adapting from something traditional? He was the editor of a newspaper that came through people's letterboxes 15 years ago, tens of thousands of readers a day, to now adapting to a lower size subscription service, but nevertheless quality.
I think the general trend and a lot of the points that Brian hit on there are very true. And it's a really fantastic example of evolving with the times. The fact is that consumer behaviors have changed and they continue to change. And people have a lot more choice these days. So there is a general trend in the marketplace of moving towards higher quality and higher value, because especially in tough economic conditions like these, everyone out there needs to sort of fight for the consumers, the pound that ultimately are in their pocket. People have to make choices every single day. So yeah, really agree with a lot of what Brian's doing there, and best of luck. It sounds like a great initiative.
Okay. I'm going to hit you with a few different elements of digitisation of business that are happening at the moment. Let's start with retail. British retail sales held steady in February, which was good news for retail, according to the ONS, and there was some more consumer confidence about. But how do you think it's splitting? How does the digitisation of retail now affect the performance of retail in the cash registers?
So I suppose looking at the numbers for February, as you mentioned, they remained relatively constant, but we start seeing this flux between the sort of physical and digital sales. So it becomes increasingly important for retailers to really think about what is my online and digital offering, and retailers need to look, they need to ask themselves some hard questions. And ultimately, if you want to drive people to an online channel or drive someone into your physical store, you need to think about what value am I providing to those consumers? So we want the choice and the convenience of online, but we want the experience of feeling products in store. And there's this sort of constant tussle between the physical and the digital worlds at the moment in retail, which we've seen going back and forth, right? Lots of brands have disappeared from the high street, but we've also seen quite a few brands who started out as digitally native organizations open up a physical retail space. So there's this kind of ongoing flux in where the value lies and how we can best serve customers ultimately.
I had an experience of this last weekend. A few weeks ago, I had a director of Fraser's, which is Mike Ashley's company, Flannels and House of Fraser, on the programme, and she was telling me about the offerings of various products. And I was in the centre of Newcastle with my partner, and the objective was to buy her a pair of nice high-end shoes. And the internet had been surfed, and shoes had been sought, and we needed to know where to get them in Newcastle. And so we found out that you could get these shoes at Flannels. Now, it was quite interesting because I thought that Flannels was men's outfitters, not women's shoes, but it turns out that they've pushed to women's shoes. So the information of where to go was on the internet, but there's no way my partner would have bought a pair of women's shoes without trying them on and size testing them and comfort testing them and look in the mirror and bought them online. And it just was an interesting mix of digital and real world experience.
Yeah, that's a fantastic example. It's a really common story that it's called a sort of a non-linear purchase journey for customers. And most of us actually do start our retail journeys online, particularly for bigger ticket items or high-end or luxury goods. As an example, we want the ability to research, to compare, to find out as much as we can. But when it comes to the purchase of the product itself, we want to feel it, we want to see it. And particularly, of course, with something like shoes, you need to check that it's comfortable and it fits. But what we'll often see is people sometimes will then return back home and complete that purchase online because for whatever reason, it might not be convenient to purchase it that day. And if you think about that from a business perspective, from the retailers, it's really interesting to track how they're marketing, targeting, and thinking about cash through tills. And what is the role of the store and what is the role of online? And how do I attribute sales to either of those channels? So that sort of emerging consumer behavior of how and where we shop is another challenge, actually, that retailers are having to figure out because obviously the in-store margins are greater and higher, but we as consumers need to be given a reason to ultimately not be shopping, from the convenience of our sofas and our smartphones. So that's kind of where the emergence of new physical retail and what's being called experiential retail is coming into it more. So you're starting to see the emergence of I suppose differentiated flagship stores that offer something to you that the online world simply can't.
Yeah, and you see this in things like Apple stores, which are almost showrooms. You can buy, but they're showrooms as well, aren't they, really?
Yeah, very much so. And the Apple showroom is sort of an early model of where that started, and you see other companies trying this too. As an example, if you go to there's a Google store in New York City, and they sell ultimately not too many products, but you don't see shelves filled with headphones. As an example, what they've done is they dedicated an entire section of their store to reenact a subway carriage with the background noise. So you try on the headphones, and they know that their consumers are experiencing this product in this way. Therefore, they want to know what it feels like to use the headphones in that way. And it was a really interesting strategy to think about. We need to tap into the ultimate, the why and the fulfillment and how are people trying to interact with my brand and providing them with the experience in a physical space to enable the completion of that journey. And that's another, much like the shoes, headphones, there's lots to consider there. We want lots of research to be done. And we only probably buy one pair of headphones every X amount of years. So it's a crucial one for retailers to get right.
Now, Charles, you come across on the podcast here as a smart kind of guy. You know what's happening in the digital world when it comes to interactions with customers and businesses. But some customers are both skeptical and a little bit distrustful of people like you. I think you're a great guy, but supposing you started to say to me, I'm going to charge you more for your electricity at 7 o'clock at night and surge price it. Or if you go into a busy pub at 5 o'clock in the evening after work, we're going to charge you more for a pint. Is this world where digital information available to business ultimately favouring business or the consumer?
That's a really interesting way of phrasing that question. And I think that idea of dynamic pricing, I suppose, is quite simply...
By the way, let's just pick you up on that. That is the correct phrase. But the media phrase, if you look at the newspapers, is surge pricing now, isn't it?
I see. Well, I suppose my interpretation of that is the same as yours. And I think if retailers are... if you're coming to a store and you are noticing that because it's a busy period, prices are more expensive, then ultimately people will vote with their wallets and you will probably lose out on business. Ultimately, the objective of that personalization is to provide more value to Charlie as a consumer. So what they should, the idea of it is to know that Charlie is a man who lives in this city, whether or not he prefers blue over red products, etc., and provide personalized, tailored offerings that are more valuable to me as an individual, rather than the exploitation of data for personal gain.
And I just think, I took my grandchildren to Disneyland this year, and I saw the monetization of queues. Vast queues of people, an hour's wait for a ride, but if you paid $35, you could go on it quickly. I have to say, I did pay the $35, and I felt very sorry for the people who I was jumping the queue. And maybe that's my British sense of fair play. But the monetization of queues is similar to surge or dynamic pricing. We've been used to it on airlines and so on. But the information that you talk about for benign reasons can also be used for quite significant profit generation.
Yeah, I think that's a fair analysis. I've been there myself, by the way, and I also paid for the fast pass at Disneyland, and did feel sorry for the people queuing for 3 or 4 hours. I think ultimately I'll reiterate the point I made earlier, which is that yes, of course, people ultimately could think about using data in that way, but we as consumers and as customers, especially these days, have a significant amount of pressure on where and how we spend our money, and particularly if you think about the emerging demographic of Gen Z, who are coming to the height of their purchasing power in the next 3 years, let's say, they are increasingly turning away from brands and away from retailers who are seen to not be ethical or be exploiting either their workforce or their customers. So brands that behave and act in that way would find themselves perhaps with a short-term bump in revenue, but long-term, probably down on business.
So you obviously, I'm going to bring Brian in as well now, but you obviously advise companies and devise their digital platforms. What is the most common kind of job that you undertake for businesses in the north of England? Just explain how you can help them before we move on and conclude with Brian.
So I think there's the most common thing we see is that a lot of retailers have grown organically over time to become the brands that we all know and love on the high street. And then when you look sort of under the hood of these organizations, you tend to see large amounts of technology debt, as an example. And then in order to evolve and create modern experiences that are aligned to the needs of consumers, they then can't move quickly enough as businesses to provide and create that new service. Now, of course, that puts them at risk, right? Because if a new digitally native organization appears and provides a new and improved service quickly, then they will lose significant market share overnight. So we do a lot of platform and technology modernization, reduction of technology debt. And then, of course, in the last 18 months or so, there's been a particular increase in the amount of data and AI transformation capabilities as well.
AI being critically important now, more than ever. Bots and talking to people, but also instant analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fascinating 18 months to be in this industry, I will say. And the rate of change within AI has been pretty transformational, to say the least. We're seeing it implemented in many different ways. Lots of retailers are sort of turning inwards and thinking about, how do I find efficiencies in my supply chain and efficiencies in the way that I produce, source, package, ship products, as an example. But we as customers as well have evolved in that time. And we're seeing people are now searching in ways like you would with ChatGPT, as an example. So there's the emergence of natural language searches. So whereas previously you might open up retailer.com and search for a blue shirt, we're now seeing this, that people are searching for work from home attire, as an example, or an outfit I can wear in the summer in the office. And retailers are having to think about how they fulfill that changing way that customers are thinking and interacting with their platforms. So one of many use cases, but certainly an exciting time.
Charlie, thank you very much. Brian, what do you make of what you've embarked on, this new digital service? And there's so much there that Charlie's got to say about what the potential is. You could run away with all your money, of course. You've got to sometimes stop and make a profit, don't you?
Yes. I mean, AI is not something that I've spent too much time taking a look at. I mean, bear in mind my print dinosaur reputation, and it's making the forward move into digital. AI seems such a big step after that. But I think that in journalism, there are several people now taking a look at what possibilities AI could throw up, and I'll probably take a watching brief on that and see how that goes. But I was interested in what Charlie was talking about earlier on about retailers, but when I think back to the days when video first came out, that people were saying that video would be the death knell of cinemas. Well, actually, no, the cinemas kind of just made the experience so much better, pleasant, and more enjoyable. And I guess that's where shops and retailers are now. That it's not just purely about, I've got something to sell, I hope I can attract enough people to come in and buy it. There's got to be this whole experience to be enjoyed.
Well, Brian, Charlie, thank you for joining us on the Northern Business Podcast. And I hope your new venture goes from strength to strength, Brian, and keep up the good work advising businesses, Charlie. And now to something a tiny bit different. It's a business that's certainly got a lot of legacy and a great future. We have to say that because they're our sponsors, but we believe it too. And that's Virtue Motors. Now, my colleague Josh has been speaking to Robert Forrester. He's the chief executive of Virtue Motors PLC. Now, it's headquartered in the northeast of England, but one of its first ever acquisitions, which is Bristol Street Motors, was founded in Birmingham, and it's been celebrating 100 years in business.
Thank you, Graham. Now, I've been doing something a little bit different this week. I've been down in Birmingham celebrating 100 years of Bristol Street Motors. Now, you might think, what's the northern connection with that? Well, Bristol Street Motors, just over 15 years ago, was the first group of dealerships that our sponsor, Virtue Motors, acquired as it set off on its journey to become the third largest motor retailer in the UK, which is where it stands today. I headed off to the original dealership in Birmingham on Bristol Street, unsurprisingly, and caught up with Robert Forrester, the CEO, to find out a little bit more about this iconic brand and its connection to the Northeast.
Just a bit of a celebration of the fact that the group major brand is 100 years old. We've got famous footballers, Dennis Mortimer of Aston Villa, who I remember seeing as a lad, and we've even got a 100-year-old former colleague who worked for 20 years for Bristol Street Motors to come in, as I'm sure you'll be given a fantastic welcome. Bristol Street Motors is quite a strange brand in some ways because it's very Midlands. You go around here in Birmingham and everybody's heard of Bristol Street Motors. You go to the northeast and everyone's heard of Bristol Street Motors because it's been the Vauxhall dealer in the northeast for decades. But nobody in the northeast knows it's a Birmingham-based company, actually. And actually a lot of people in the Midlands don't realise that Bristol Street Motors is all the way up into Northumberland. So I think actually our national marketing is probably dissolving those things, but in reality, people have a local connection with their local dealership, and that's what's important really. Well, you're not interacting with a national brand, are you? You're interacting with the people in your local dealership, and that will ever remain thus. But I think it's got a good future, and I think as long as our customers enjoy buying from us and coming back for service, then we've got a great future.
Well, it's good to see a business that's 100 years old and prospering in its next century. Thanks to Robert Forrester there for talking to my colleague Josh Haverkin. Now, if you'd like to join us as a guest on the Northern Business Podcast, do get in touch with me via LinkedIn. We're off for a week for the Easter holiday, so won't be with you next week. I do want to thank my podcast producer Harry Sinclair and today's technical operator Joseph Sayer. Join us next time on the Northern Business Podcast. You can like, rate or subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.